What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
I found out I wasn't invited to Christmas through a group chat I was never supposed to see, and if that doesn't set the tone for how deeply twisted this whole thing is, then I don't know what will. It was around 9 in the evening, the Monday before Christmas, and I was sitting on my couch in my apartment, curled up with a chamomile tea and one of those mindless baking competition shows humming softly in the background, when my phone buzzed with a message from my mom's group thread, the one we only really used to share family pictures or plan birthdays. At first, I thought nothing of it. I even smiled when I saw Mom's name pop up because it had been a few days since I'd heard from her. Then I opened the message and something inside me shifted so suddenly, so permanently, that I don't think it will ever shift back. The message wasn't from Mom, it was from Lindsay, my sister, and it was clearly meant to be a private conversation that she accidentally sent to the whole family group. It said, word for word, "We can't deal with Maya's emotional meltdowns again this year. She's exhausting. Let's just keep it small and peaceful. Honestly, it'll be better without her." No punctuation. No filter. No shame. Just a raw little stab in the back, tossed out casually like it meant nothing. And the worst part, the truly unforgivable part, was that no one in that thread disagreed. My mother didn't jump to my defense. My cousin stayed quiet. And within 5 minutes, another message from Lindsay came through, trying to cover her tracks. Oops. Wrong chat. Followed by a laughing emoji, like this whole thing was some kind of harmless joke. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just silence from everyone else. As if it had all been said and agreed upon already. As if they'd just been waiting for the moment to let me know I was officially off the invite list. I didn't respond. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I just sat there, phone glowing in my hand, realizing with a kind of cold clarity that takes years to develop, that I had spent the better part of a decade propping up a sister who saw me as a burden. That I had given my time, my money, and frankly, my soul to a family that had never once thought about the cost of their comfort on my back. The show on TV kept playing, contestants giggling over fallen soufflés, but I couldn't hear it anymore. My world had narrowed to a single line in that text: she's exhausting. Not she's struggling. Not she's been through a lot. Just exhausting. Like I was some faulty appliance they'd been meaning to replace. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle again even though I hadn't touched the tea in my cup. My hands were steady, which surprised me. No shaking. No tears. Just something quiet settling into my bones. I leaned against the counter and stared out the window at the apartment complex across the street. The lights were on in most of the units, families cooking dinner, watching movies, laughing, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. I felt like I was standing exactly where I was supposed to be. Alone, yes, but also aware, finally, fully of where I stood with everyone. I don't think Lindsay remembers that I'm listed as a co-signer on their mortgage. I don't think she realizes that the car she drives, the brand new white Lexus with the heated seats and backup camera, was leased under my name because her credit was trash after she defaulted on 3 cards back in 2019. I don't think she knows that the surprise bonus she got last spring was actually a quiet check from me to keep her and Brad from dipping into their 401k. And that's just the surface. There are things I've done for her and for my mother that no one ever asked me to do, but that I did because I thought that was love. Because I thought family meant stepping up, even when it hurt, even when it drained me dry. And now here I was, not even worth a damn chair at the dinner table. It's funny, isn't it? How people can call you exhausting right after they've bled you for years without so much as a thank you. How they smile in your face and take your help, then laugh behind your back because you had a breakdown once. Or twice. Because life crushed you one too many times and you cried in front of them instead of keeping it cute. People don't want vulnerability. They want convenience. They want the version of you that pays the bills and keeps her mouth shut. The one who shows up with presents and wine and a forced smile. And when that version starts to fray, they call you too much. I didn't finish making the tea. Instead, I walked to the hallway closet, reached up to the top shelf, and pulled down the accordion folder I hadn't touched in over a year. It was red, heavy, thick with documents. I laid it out on my kitchen table like it was evidence in a trial, flipping it open to the tab marked Lindsay. Inside, the mortgage details, the loan agreement, the Lexus lease papers, the account statements from the investment account I had opened to help the kids go to college one day. Her name wasn't even on half of it. Mine was. My credit. My liability. My risk. For a woman who thought I was exhausting, she sure relied on me a hell of a lot. And that's when the idea started to form, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. I wasn't going to send an angry message. I wasn't going to guilt anyone or beg for a seat at a table I wasn't welcome at. No, I was going to step back. Quietly. Strategically. Completely. I was going to remove myself, not just from the group chat, but from every single lifeline they'd gotten used to thinking would always be there. Because what they don't realize, what they never bothered to think about, is that the exhausting part of me, the part they really can't handle, isn't the tears or the honesty or the need for connection. It's the part that knows where the money is. And knows how to shut it all down. It's an odd kind of satisfaction, really, the quiet kind that doesn't come with applause or recognition or even words, just the heavy, undeniable certainty that after years of being overlooked, underestimated, and mischaracterized, you're finally holding the reins with both hands, and nobody even realizes you've already started pulling. That night, after reading that text, I didn't rage or spiral or send some long-winded monologue about betrayal and boundaries. I just opened my laptop, typed in a few passwords I never forgot but always wished I had, and started unweaving the web I had spent years gently stitching together beneath my sister's crumbling life. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was simply the beginning of an unspoken correction, one where the truth would be delivered not through words, but through consequence. The first step was the joint credit card, technically hers, but under my name because when she had begged me to help her rebuild her credit after her second bankruptcy, I had agreed, not because I trusted her, but because I didn't want her kids to go without. I logged in, glanced at the balance, and shook my head when I saw $378 charged at some boutique spa just 2 days ago, followed by $96 at a wine subscription service. It wasn't even the money, not really. It was the ease with which she lived off of me, spending like the good times would never end, like the generosity she depended on was some eternal fountain that would never dry up, no matter how thoughtlessly she drank from it. I hit suspend card, entered the confirmation code, and leaned back in my chair as the words, "Access blocked," flashed on the screen. Just like that, her convenience cracked. Next was the Lexus. God, the Lexus. She had insisted she needed a new car because the old minivan was unsafe and she didn't want the kids driving in it, even though, truthfully, it was her pride that was unsafe, not the car. The dealer had looked at her credit and practically laughed her out of the showroom until she called me, voice trembling, nearly in tears, begging me to co-sign just so she could have something reliable. I had gone down there myself, signed on the dotted line, and even paid the first 4 months because she just needed time to catch up. That was 1.5 years ago, and I hadn't heard a single word about that lease since. I logged into the finance site, pulled up the account, and saw her most recent payment was over 3 weeks late. A single call later, I had the car listed for voluntary repossession, paperwork submitted, her driving privilege soon to be interrupted. The silence I maintained was strategic, cold, yes, but never cruel. I wasn't taking anything she earned. I was simply reclaiming what was mine. Then came the savings account, the one she didn't know I still monitored, the one I had set up for her youngest when he was born, initially just $1,000, then added to every Christmas and birthday because it felt like something I could do that was real, something that mattered. But she had long since found a way to attach that account to her own mobile banking, transferring out small amounts here and there, always labeling them groceries or school stuff, never mentioning it to me, probably hoping I'd never notice. But I did. And this time, I closed the account entirely, moving the remaining balance to a trust fund I set up that only I could touch until the child turned 18. I left no note, no warning, just disappeared the resource. The only trace left behind was a failed login notification she'd likely see sometime the next morning when she tried to pull $50 for takeout. It's strange how easily people grow used to your generosity, how quickly they begin to expect it, to build their lives around it, like it's not coming from a place of personal sacrifice, but from some bottomless pit of obligation. Lindsay had always treated my help like it was owed to her, like I should feel lucky to have a family to give to, like my boundaries were some rude inconvenience she had to tiptoe around. And my mother, sweet as she could be when it suited her, never once stepped in to question why her younger daughter's adult life was being quietly subsidized by the older one, never once pulled Lindsay aside and said, "You're leaning too hard. You're taking too much." Instead, she'd call me on random Thursdays and say things like, "Lindsay's having a rough week," or "Can you just help out one more time?" As if my exhaustion was imaginary, while Lindsay's incompetence was some fragile condition that needed nurturing. And now the silence had begun to spread. By the second day after the group text debacle, I hadn't responded to anyone, hadn't acknowledged the oops or the radio silence that followed, hadn't said a word to Mom or Lindsay. That morning, my phone lit up with a missed call from my mother and 2 voicemails, both of them dancing awkwardly around the topic, but neither offering an apology. The first was just Mom saying, "Hey honey, haven't heard from you, hope everything's okay." The second was shorter, tighter, "Lindsay's having some problems with her credit card. Did you change something? She's saying she can't access it, and she's very upset." I listened to both messages without emotion, then deleted them without reply. It was surreal, in a way, watching them scramble in real time, trying to patch holes in a ship they didn't even realize I had built and could sink at will. I knew what was coming next. Panic. Accusation. Eventually, a plea. But I wasn't rushing the process. I wanted them to feel the quiet undoing. I wanted them to sit in the discomfort of uncertainty, to ask themselves, not out of curiosity but out of necessity, how deep my involvement in their lives really went. Because here's the thing, people think power is about noise, about confrontation and dominance and raised voices, but it's not. Real power is the ability to disappear and let the absence speak for itself. It's in the account that won't open, the check that never clears, the support that vanishes without warning. It's in the way they suddenly realize they built their safety net on someone they never truly respected. And maybe that's why I didn't feel guilty, not even a little. Because for the first time, I wasn't covering for them. I wasn't rescuing them. I was letting the truth rise to the surface, and whatever broke under the weight of it wasn't my responsibility anymore. They called me exhausting. But what they never understood is that I'm only exhausting when I'm forced to keep pretending that nothing's wrong. And now? Now, I'm quiet. And that should terrify them. Christmas morning came in like any other, soft sunlight pushing through the thin linen curtains of my living room, a cold breeze humming at the windows, and the empty, unspoken weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air like a low fog that refuses to lift. I had woken up earlier than usual, not out of excitement or anticipation, but from the silence, the kind that wasn't peaceful, but echoing loud in its stillness, pointed in its absence. For the first time in over a decade, I had nowhere to be, no presents to load into my trunk, no casserole to reheat, no face to paint on in the rearview mirror as I prepared myself to enter a home where I was needed, but never quite welcomed. Where I was appreciated only in theory but not in practice, where I was always walking the line between generous sister and emotional liability, depending on how fragile Lindsay's ego was feeling that day. I padded barefoot into the kitchen and made coffee, the kind I actually liked, not the generic pod machine stuff Mom always stocked for the holidays, and I stood there in the silence, sipping it slowly, letting the warmth settle in my chest, knowing full well that while I was standing still, somewhere across town, my absence was beginning to scream louder than any presence I'd ever brought into a room. There's something about being left out that does something to your sense of self. It sharpens it, chisels away the softness, exposes a harder truth beneath the surface, and as I watched the steam rise from my mug, I didn't feel rejected. I felt confirmed. They had cut me out thinking I'd slink away quietly, that I'd fade into the background, that my silence would mean surrender, when in reality, it was the first time I had stopped giving them a script to follow. By 10:30, my phone had already buzzed half a dozen times, first from Mom, then from Lindsay, then from Brad, who rarely texted me unless he needed help filling out a refinance form or wanted to forward me some cryptic, "Hey, can you take a look at this?" message from their accountant. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. I already knew what they said. The credit card wasn't working. The mortgage company had left a message. The Lexus had a missed payment notification. Their holiday plans, painstakingly curated down to the scented candles and matching pajamas, were starting to unravel, thread by invisible thread, and none of them could yet see the common hand holding those threads in place all this time. But they were starting to suspect. Somewhere around noon, after I'd finished my breakfast and decided against putting on anything other than sweatpants, I opened my laptop and pulled up the online dashboard for the brokerage account Lindsay and Brad had long forgotten I had partial control over. It was originally supposed to be for emergencies only, a place to park the funds they didn't want mom or the kids to know about, what Lindsay used to call their adult life buffer. Like it was some exclusive club that only people who pretended their problems were temporary could join. I stared at the numbers, modest, but not insignificant, and clicked freeze withdrawals. Just one simple confirmation. No fanfare. No digital fireworks. Just a clean, administrative act that would sit there, silent and unexplained, until they tried to reach for it and found the door locked. It wasn't long after that I got the first voicemail from Lindsay that didn't come laced in passive aggression or smug condescension. Her voice was shaky, pitched higher than usual, forced into sweetness that couldn't quite mask the panic under the surface. She said she hoped I was okay, and that everyone missed me, and that maybe we could chat after the holidays, because there were a few weird issues popping up and she thought maybe I accidentally adjusted something. It was the kind of message that expected me to rush in with an apology, as if I were the one who had made the mistake, as if I'd unintentionally caused disruption instead of deliberately withdrawing the scaffolding they'd built their entire adult lives upon. I played it once, then again, and then I deleted it without response. Somewhere across the city, they were opening presents under a tree I had helped pay for, sitting on furniture I once helped finance during one of Lindsay's many bad months, sipping coffee from mugs that were part of a 12-piece ceramic set I had ordered and had delivered when they were too broke to furnish their kitchen. But I wasn't there, and no amount of forced laughter or manufactured cheer could cover up the growing cracks in the foundation I had held together for so long. Brad was likely pacing the kitchen, trying to log into the brokerage site, probably calling customer service and being told, again and again, that account access was frozen per authorized request. Lindsay was likely snapping at the kids, unable to hide her spiraling mood, blaming everything from the Wi-Fi to the weather, while deep down knowing, though she wouldn't admit it out loud just yet, that this was my doing, and that she had asked for it without even realizing it. Meanwhile, Mom's text came through just before 3 o'clock. Short, brittle, carefully composed. "I know things are tense, but I don't want this to ruin Christmas. Lindsay is struggling, and I think you two need to talk soon. We're family. Please don't do anything rash." The irony of her choosing the word rash was almost laughable. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't called anyone names. I hadn't stormed out or written any emotional manifestos. I had simply stopped holding everything up. And now, the structure was buckling under its own neglected weight, and they wanted me to come back and reinforce it again without acknowledging why it was falling apart in the first place. I spent the rest of the afternoon watching old home movies I hadn't looked at in years, ones I digitized for Mom last winter and stored on my hard drive. One in particular stood out, Christmas, 2015. Lindsay unwrapping a scarf I had bought her after she mentioned in passing that her favorite one had a hole. She looked at it, smiled that tight little smile of performative gratitude, then turned to Mom and whispered, clear as day on the audio, "Maya always buys the boring gifts." I had laughed it off at the time, told myself she didn't mean anything by it, convinced myself that being practical wasn't a flaw. But watching it now, with everything stripped bare, it hit me differently. It wasn't just a joke. It was the root of everything. I wasn't fun. I wasn't shiny. I was useful. And when I stopped being useful, I became a problem. So I poured another cup of coffee, curled up in my blanket, and let the quiet in. Not out of sadness. Not out of revenge. But because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't pretending to be welcome where I wasn't. And that honesty, cold as it may be, was the only gift I needed that year. And while they spent Christmas trying to troubleshoot a crisis they didn't understand, I finally exhaled in peace. Because they had always wanted me to disappear. So I did. But not before taking everything they forgot I gave them. The thing about unraveling someone's life, especially when that life has been delicately and irresponsibly draped over your shoulders for so many years that you've forgotten where your obligations end and their entitlement begins, is that, eventually, the silence you've chosen as your weapon doesn't just sting, it begins to echo, and not in some metaphorical, poetic way, but in a very real, very intrusive form of panic that finds its way into their every waking moment. It was 2 days after Christmas when that shift became tangible, no longer just suspicion or inconvenience on their end, but a creeping, undeniable understanding that something had fundamentally changed, that the gears which had always kept turning in their favor, quietly greased by my patience, my credit score, and my relentless emotional flexibility, were grinding to a halt, and that no amount of cheerful apologies or vague texts would get things back to the way they had been. That morning began like any other, at least for me, slow, deliberate still. I read for a while, checked my emails, made eggs the way I liked them without someone standing behind me asking if I had anything non-dairy or gluten-free, and ignored 3 calls from Lindsay that came within 20 minutes of each other. There was no voicemail this time, just the ringing and the silence that followed. She had stopped pretending. There were no more sugar-coated messages about missing me or pretending her meltdown was some kind of logistical mishap. Now it was desperation, raw and heavy, but still not enough to crack the shell of denial she had wrapped herself in for years. She didn't want to apologize. She wanted access. And until she could have that, she wasn't capable of saying anything meaningful. I didn't return the calls. Instead, I logged into the financial platform where our joint education account was held, the one she'd asked me to help manage back when her youngest was starting kindergarten, and she had some vague dream of private school applications that never fully materialized. We'd split the contributions in theory, but in reality, it was me quietly depositing monthly payments while she occasionally dropped in a one-time boost when tax returns hit or when Brad got a commission. I looked at the balance, not out of bitterness, but because it had become a symbol of the invisible labor I had performed for a decade, of the way she had casually allowed me to carry the future of her children while simultaneously dismissing me as unstable and overdramatic. I redirected the funds into a solo custodial account under my name, with a note on the back end that disallowed external contribution access without dual authentication. If she wanted control, she'd have to come through me. And not with a text. By noon, the real storm hit. It wasn't Lindsay this time. It was Mom. There's a specific knock that only mothers seem to have, the one that sounds urgent without being frantic, that tries to mask judgment behind concern, the knock that says, "I didn't come to fight," but is already preparing a monologue in the car. I didn't answer at first. I stood by the door, listening, waiting to see if she'd leave, but after the 3rd round of knocking and a muffled, "Maya, please," I opened it and stepped aside. Mom looked tired. Not sick or frail, just drained in that way people get when they've spent years ignoring tension and hoping it would dissolve on its own. She stepped inside, not asking permission, and I let her. She didn't sit. She paced, quietly at first, taking in the apartment like it was a crime scene, like she was trying to spot the moment where I had gone from dutiful daughter to unforgiving ghost. Then she turned to me and said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think really hard before you answer. Is this really worth tearing the family apart?" The question landed exactly the way she meant it to, sharp, guilt-laced, completely devoid of irony. I looked at her, measured her words, and then asked, calmly, "Is what worth it, Mom? Saying nothing while I get erased from my own family? Watching everyone nod along when Lindsay calls me a burden? Or finally stepping back from a system that's been bleeding me dry for 10 years? She sighed, that deep, maternal exhale that was supposed to communicate sorrow and understanding, but always managed to carry just enough disappointment to make me feel like the unreasonable one. Lindsay didn't mean what she said. You know how she gets when she's overwhelmed. This has all gone too far. Brad's angry. The kids are confused. She's talking about selling the car just to get some relief. Can't you just put things back for now and we'll talk it out? I stared at her for a long moment, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to give her the time to hear the silence between us, the silence that had always existed but had been filled with favors, with money, with apologies that I had made on behalf of others just to keep the peace. No, I said, not loudly, not angrily, just with finality. No, I can't. And that's when the expression on her face shifted. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just looked like she realized something she had always known but never wanted to admit, that the glue holding this family together had never been tradition, never been love or unity or even shared memories. It had been me. Quiet, exhausted, ever reliable me. And now that I wasn't smoothing the edges, everything sharp was finally visible. That night, Lindsay sent a message I didn't expect. No preamble, no pretense, just one blunt sentence. Did you cancel the auto pay on the kids' school deposit? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because what she was really asking, underneath the question, was, are you serious? Are you really doing this? Are you really walking away? And the truth was, I wasn't walking away. I had already gone. But the shift, the real shift, wasn't in my choices or my silence or the trail of canceled accounts and frozen support systems I had left behind. It was in the realization, finally dawning on them all, that I had never been the problem, never the storm they needed to weather. I was the levee. And they had spent years kicking holes in it. So now, as the water rushed in, all I did was let it. There's a moment in every unraveling when the threads aren't just coming loose. They've already fallen, silently, invisibly, into a heap at your feet, and what's left is not a decision, not a question, not even a crossroads, but a void. A kind of emotional stillness so vast and irreversible that it doesn't demand action. It merely waits for you to acknowledge that you have, at long last, stepped fully and completely out of the role you were never meant to carry. That moment came for me on New Year's Eve, in the form of a soft knock at my door and a text just minutes before it, reading only, "Please. We need to talk." It was from Mom, and somehow I knew, before I even stood up, before I moved toward the door, before I looked through the peephole, that she wasn't coming with another attempt to patch things up with vague promises and recycled phrases like, "We're family," or, "You know how your sister gets." This time, she came because there was nothing left to say that would smooth it over, and she knew it. She sat down on the edge of my couch, clutching a purse far too small to justify bringing, but just large enough to give her hands something to do. She looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before, not just emotionally drained, but deflated, like whatever narrative she had spent her life believing about what held her daughters together had finally burst. And she was left with pieces that didn't fit any longer. There was no preamble, no pleasantries. She looked up and said, "Lindsay says Brad might leave her." It was the kind of sentence designed to provoke a reaction, to rattle some dormant loyalty in me, as if the mere thought of my sister's life crumbling would shake loose some old compulsion to fix, to rush in and stitch things back together in the dark. But nothing moved in me. I waited. And when she realized I wasn't going to interrupt, she continued. "She's overwhelmed, Maya. She's terrified. The credit cards are all frozen, the mortgage company is calling, and Brad doesn't understand why everything is locked down. He's blaming her. And she's not handling it well. She's talking about moving in with me and your dad for a while. And the kids are scared. She's scared. It's all too much, and I think she knows she messed up. I really do." The words "I think she knows" hung in the air like a loose bulb flickering in a quiet room, uncertain, reluctant, begging for belief but offering none. I turned to look at her then, slowly, and I asked a question I already knew she wouldn't answer clearly. Did she say that? That she messed up? Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked down at her lap. Not in those words. But she's hurting. She's been crying. That should mean something. And it did, in its own tragic, circular way. It meant that, even in the wreckage, Lindsay hadn't found the humility to name what she'd done. She hadn't said, I hurt you, or I used you, or I pushed you out of the family, then panicked when I realized I needed you more than I wanted to admit. She hadn't owned any of it. She had simply collapsed under the weight of consequence, and once again, the expectation was that I, quiet, dependable, emotionally exhausting Maya, would step back into the fold and absorb it all in the name of peace. But peace, I had come to understand, is not the absence of conflict, it is the presence of justice. And there had been no justice in how I was treated, how I was excluded, how I had been leaned on, drained, dismissed, and discarded the moment I became inconvenient. So I didn't say anything for a while. I let Mom sit in the silence she had helped build, let her feel the weight of everything that had gone unsaid for too long. When I finally did speak, my voice was low, but clear. All my life, I've been the bigger person. I've paid for things nobody thanked me for. I've shown up when no one else would. I've kept secrets, solved problems, covered mistakes, and carried shame that didn't even belong to me. And the second I stopped doing those things, the second I dared to act like my presence mattered, they called me exhausting. And you didn't stop them. She didn't deny it. And that, more than anything else, told me that some part of her had known it all along. Known, but chosen not to face it. Because to admit that would mean facing the full scope of what she had allowed to happen, not just once, not in one bad week, but for years. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply said, I'm done, Mom. You can stay for tea if you want. But I'm not undoing any of it. I won't fix this. She didn't stay for tea. The next morning, I received one last message from Lindsay. Not a phone call, not a voice note, just a short, typed-out text that felt like it had taken her days to write and even longer to decide to send. It said, I didn't mean to hurt you. Please. I need help. I don't know what else to do. I sat with that message for a long time. Stared at it, not because I didn't know how I felt, but because I knew exactly how I felt and I needed a moment to let it settle fully into my skin. It was not an apology. It was not an act of contrition. It was a hand reaching out not for reconciliation, but for relief. The same hand that had always reached out, always needing, always taking, never stopping to ask whether the well had a bottom. I opened a blank message window. I typed 3 different responses, none of which I sent. I thought about replying with grace. I thought about replying with fury. I thought about saying nothing at all. In the end, I chose silence. I deleted the draft, locked my phone, and slid it across the table until it disappeared from my sight. Later that evening, as the sky began to dim and the world outside prepared to ring in a new year, I put on a coat, stepped out into the cold, and walked without direction through the quiet streets. Families were lighting sparklers on their porches. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Laughter drifted from open windows. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel pulled or tethered or responsible for keeping anyone afloat. I felt free. Some people learn the hard way. Others never learn at all. I still don't know which one my sister is. And honestly, I don't care anymore.